All right. How's everybody? Who is everybody? Is my mic working?
Yeah, it's working.
Oh, there. I heard Shady. How's it going, Shady?
Good. How are you?
Good. You can tell John's on. Looks like John and Sherry. Who else is on?
Frank.
Oh, Frank. Hi, Frank.
And Shady.
What time is it, John?
It is 2:45.
Oh, yeah. See, I'm good and late. Couldn't see anything on my computer to get on here, so it took me a little bit.
I didn't mention why you were out this morning, just in case you were the one that wanted to tell that story. So
it doesn't matter to me. It's just I can't see nothing, so I'm learning about being blind. I can hear you and I can talk, but I can't see much.
Well, hopefully this is temporary.
Yeah, it'll take it. It's some blood in my eye. Inside my eyeball.
What happened?
Well, I guess between deterioration on my capillaries and then coughing too hard, blew some blood into my eye. And of course, I've got one eye that I haven't been able to see out of since I was about 20. So I had one good eye, and it's the good eye that did it. So now pretty much all I see looks like if you wipe Vaseline all over your eyes and tried to see.
Will that resolve as the blood dissolves and
Supposed to. The guy so I went to a doctor on Thursday, and they told me they thought it was a detached retina. So they're all nervous, and then wanted me in on an emergency basis into the big hospital, the big eye clinic. So I went down there Friday, and they did, I don't know, a whole bunch of different tests and pictures and shot dye in me and took more pictures. And they figured out it wasn't a detached retina. So that was good. But the blood then and the cause of the problem is not necessarily a quick resolution either. So anyway, I think what I understood was that I could either have surgery to remove the blood from inside my eye, which is very risky and invasive and all that, or just get some shots. And either way, in about 6 months, it would result in the same thing. So I think what that means is it could take between a couple of days and 6 months to resolve itself. I don't know. Something like that. Anyway, but I'm feeling good. Just can't see too good. So other than that, everything's fine. So what are you guys working on?
Nothing yet.
What are we gonna work on?
well, we did the net this morning.
Yeah, good
Dragnet. I had good conversation. I just started the whole thing by saying, you guys have to help out, and and they did.
Oh, good.
So everyone was making really good comments, and yeah, it was a good conversation.
So Shady, were you there this morning?
Yeah, I was there.
So what was the main point of the parable today?
Why did you have to ask me? I kind of fell asleep halfway through it.
What?
Oh boy. Oh no. You did bring in your test question again.
I know that seems to be on my mind lately. Like I'm feeling very triggered by it, and I'm not quite sure why.
What's the test question?
I seem to really be struggling with this being tested. Like I really resent the feeling of being tested to make us better, or being, I don't know.
You
The
mean
intent,
what-
I guess the intent behind being tested, or I get, well, Chris isn't here, so I don't want to twist his words at all. But
Chris
Lions.
Lion?
Yeah.
he was there this morning. But I asked him what he meant by that, but it's the statement of, I think he said that he thought that God was teaching him a lesson. Was that correct, John? I don't want to completely misinterpret what
well,
he was saying.
he felt like it was a lesson that he went through this moment, and it was a lesson that helped him to learn to rest in God more, trust in God more. Yep.
And he did not say what I'm about to say at all.
Okay.
But it immediately made me think, so he's having back pain, like God is making him have back pain to teach him patience. And I don't know why I am struggling with this concept, because I don't think I feel that way, but for some reason lately, that's all I can think about.
Well, that's okay, because what I just heard you say is that he said and meant that he was going through something that was teaching him a lesson that helped him trust God or rely on God or depend on God more. So he was expressing it as a positive, but it triggered for you a negative, and the negative, it's good to figure it out, because if the negative is true, then that would be a problem, meaning God just, making up crises to put you through to either challenge you, test you, maybe make you stronger, or it doesn't matter what we put there on the end. The thing, isn't it true, the thing you're struggling with is this idea that we hear a lot expressed out there in false Christianity, that yeah, God is doing this to you so that you can learn, or you can get better, stronger, have more faith, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That thinking, meaning what they're expressing, which is what you're reacting to, meaning I don't like the sound of that. Then is that true? Right? That's an okay reaction to have. It is good to get that figured out.
I think it's how I'm interpreting it, because he did not mean it.
He did not mean that
like that at all.
Yeah, and I heard that when the first time you explained it, is that it's not necessarily what Chris meant or what he said even, but it triggered for you that idea, and it's plenty fine actually for you to be concerned about that idea and question and keep working on it and get some resolve for it. Nothing wrong with that.
We did talk about this on Thursday as well, so I don't want to keep rehashing the same thing for all of you guys. I feel bad.
Nah, I don't feel bad. It's actually good for everybody to think about. So what was the resolve on Thursday to it?
More or less what I got out of it was, he doesn't maliciously test. It's not like he's sitting there like, haha, I'm going to create this obstacle and see what she chooses.
Yeah.
And everything was fine. And then I woke up the next morning and it was like a different scenario. and then I have to rehash the whole thing all over again. It's I don't know. It's weird. Like the night at Amber's, when I could have chosen to stay, or I could have chosen to leave.
Yeah.
I could look at that as a test.
Yeah.
At the time, it's not like I was sitting there saying, he's testing me right now, and I have to choose the right way. I can look back on it and say, that was a test and I chose correctly. And I think that's where I am struggling, is when you're in the moment and you're saying he's testing me, opposed to looking back and saying,
Sure.
that was a good test And I'm glad that I chose to choose him.
Well, even Paul says, that trials is the one of the English words that we would use for translation. Trials never feel good for the present, meaning when we're going through them. But in the afterwards or in the result, if it produces something good, which is where Chris was expressing from, then we actually give thanks for that experience. But it would still be incorrect to say that God sort of developed or designed or planned out that particular crisis, to impose upon you. Because say the crisis there at Amber's, what created the crisis was something bad that was going on. Something going on that was the devil's work, actually. And that's what imposed the crisis, trial, stress, even a need to make a decision about something, right? So it would be more correct to say that the test was about what the devil was trying to accomplish. And in your case, he failed because God produced something good out of it for you. Why we want to turn around and say, God tested me, I don't know. It is true, I'm more comfortable with God planning and sort of bringing about my tests and trials than the devil, because I know God would be working on it for my benefit versus the devil. So if I had to choose between the two, I'd rather, say, okay, I'd like God to be the one controlling and planning out the tests and trials I go through. But that comes because I trust him and I know him, not because I think he's maliciously planning some crisis for me. I do like that he's in charge of whether it gets to be, whether it's allowed to come my way or not, touch me or not, right? Because he could stop it. So like with Job, the devil did the disaster of bringing destruction on his household. God didn't do that. The devil did that, but God is the one that, the devil couldn't do it unless God allowed it. So all of those are pieces of the formula. And I think all you're really asking, Shady, is to see and know more clearly that in that whatever test, trial, crisis, that to see God's face so that you trust him more than you did before. There's nothing wrong with that.
Barb sent me let me see what it is. It's Patriarchs and Prophets.
I was going to bring that up. Maybe we should go through those couple paragraphs. So
Yeah.
129.1 and 129.2. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. All the way down to 129.3. It's the beginning of 129.2.
Yeah, 2 and 3. You're right.
That bothers me the most. It's the first sentence.
So start at the top of the paragraph where the problem is.
Okay. The Lord in his providence had brought this trial upon Abraham to teach him lessons of submission, patience, and faith, lessons that were to be placed on record for the benefit of all who should afterward be called to endure affliction. So that to me sounds like he's making him an example, which brings me around to Barb and I have had discussions about, Barb, do you call us the jurors? I think, yeah. And so then it makes me feel like humans are examples.
In a sense, yes, because it's, when he wins this case in court, and God wins this case in court, it's because the whole onlooking universe will agree that he is right and true, but I think even the rejectors of his grace recognize that. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that's confused about that in the end.
So what was the trial in this story, Shady, that Abraham was going through?
I think he was called to the land of Canaan. Well,
is that what it was about? I don't think,
there was a drought right away when he was called. Shady and I just read this in the Bible, and I was reading ahead the chapter, and I sent that thing to her because it was related to the testing question we had just discussed on Thursday.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if you had a chance to read that chapter yet, Shady, but I think it was about he had just gotten to the land of Canaan, and he noticed there were people in the land that weren't faithful to God and whatnot, and they were occupying the land, and God said, this will basically be your land one day or something like that for your descendants. And then shortly thereafter there was a drought, and then he retreated to Egypt after that. But I think it was in the context of when that drought came and he didn't have enough food for his sheep and goats and whatnot. He might have doubted a bit. Did he really hear God's voice? Is this really the direction he was called to go?
Right.
Right.
And later on in the paragraph, it changes to he permitted affliction or he permits trials. And that seats a lot easier to me than him actually bringing the trial.
Right. So that's why I was curious. What particularly was the trial in this story? Was it that there was no food? Was it that he had to go to Egypt? Was it that he would be faced with the king wanting his wife? And would he lie or not lie? What was the trial?
Well, I think as a whole, I think the trial is trusting or not trusting.
Good.
I don't know if it's because it seems like all of his story was just trial after trial after trial, but it all revolves around trusting
Trusting or
God.
not exactly. So, so when it says God in his providence, what does that mean?
I don't know.
See, we assume God in his planning, but that's not necessarily what that means, God in his providence. What is his providence? Can you look that word up, Barb, in the dictionary? What's providence?
Sure, let me go try to find it. I think of like him seeing the beginning from the end, but I don't know. Let's find the word.
Google says the protection, care of God or of nature as a spiritual power.
I like that. And the protection of God. Okay, so God in his protective power, read the sentence that way in that paragraph to me, and what does it say?
The Lord in his protective power had brought this trial upon Abraham. It still sounds the same, even though it says protective. That's like a parent saying, I'm here, but
Well, it reminds me
this test.
And it reminds me because so recently we read about the flood, and it's like he knew the flood would be for their good, to check the evil that was rampant in the land. He meant it to them as a mercy, not as a punishment. Mom! It was to protect those who are faithful to him from being influenced in a sense too.
Well, so I'm not saying that Google has the best definition. I just wanted to see how it worked there. So what did you find in another definition?
No, I didn't look anywhere else. I mean,
you got that off Google.
Would the Bible have a definition? Now I gotta look in one of my.
No, you could ask the Bible dictionary.
One on Google, the third one there said his foreknowledge, or where did it say that? Timely preparation for future eventualities, his foresight.
Okay, good. So it's going to include the fact that he sees ahead and knows what's coming, right? And in that he also can see Abraham's weakness, where Abraham needs to learn what he needs to learn about himself. I think of Peter in Desire of Ages. It says that Peter, when he said he would not deny his Lord, he meant it. He meant every word of it. but he did not know himself. Inside of him were roots of evil that circumstances would fan into life. Peter didn't know that. He didn't know it was there. He didn't know what plant would come up out of those roots of evil. So
Bobby,
he
sorry.
couldn't, that's right, he couldn't foresee that, but God could, is all I was gonna cap on that. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, yeah. So in one of the dictionaries, it says foreseeing care and guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Another one says manifestation of divine care or direction.
So again, it's care.
It's all about
foreknowledge.
care. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what's cool is that in his caring, if he's going to do planning, the part of the word that trips us up at first is the plan, like God planned this out. But the only reason that word's a problem is because of what we view the motive is behind that planning. If it's for our not so good versus good, right? Then we would have a problem with it. But you like, Shady, how it says he permits, right?
Yeah.
So in his caring planning, part of it is about permitting, which is the evil and what evil does. He doesn't do that. He doesn't do the evil. He didn't cause the people to push Peter in order to get Peter to fail. God just knew that was coming. He knew what Satan was going to do through the mouths of other people to Peter. And he knew that Peter wasn't going to be able to stand up to that. So he knew that Peter was going to fail. So in his caring planning, right, and caring about Peter planning, he doesn't tell him ahead of time so that he can say, see, I told you so. He tells him ahead of time so that when he adds, and Peter, don't let your heart be troubled, right? When this happens to you, don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Believe what you've learned about me so far, that I love you, I care for you, I trust you. And remember I said, anyone who sins against me will be forgiven. That's a statement he made earlier in the story. So he's trying to give Peter preparedness, readiness for not just the trial, but in this case, for Peter's failure in the trial. That's a lot of watch care, and of course it's easier to see in Peter's story because we have all the details for that story. With Abraham, there's not as many details, and even in Ellen White's description, it doesn't go that detailed to explain all that. Job's story it does though, because we see Satan come to God and say, hey, I want to sift this guy because this guy, he's only following you because you take care of him. And as soon as you stop, then he's going to turn against you. And so God in his providence, which is his watch care over Job and over the whole universe at the same time, he does allow, in Job's case, this trial of his entire family being killed, wiped out, flocks, everything, and even Job to get boils and all this stuff. Why? So that Job has an opportunity, which Job wants more than anything else, we learn by the end of the story, to be able to say what is right about God. Meaning, Job really was God's friend. Job was not grievous towards God because of this trial. When he didn't understand it all, and some of it seemed confusing, which makes the trial even more valuable. But at the end, if we make God uninvolved, meaning he just sort of stood back and, hey, it happened what has happened, and good thing Job was as strong as he was, well, that would be an uncaring God. And if he did it with malicious intent, like, well, I want to see if Job is going to be loyal to me. But see, in Job's story, God said, have you seen my friend Job? God already knew where Job was. So this wasn't a test like God needed proof that Job would make it. And did Job learn some stuff from it? Yeah, I think he did. But even then, it wasn't because that was stated in the story that that's what the point was, or that was what was necessary. So in the end, what I think is important about the providence or the watch care planning is to understand the heart and the motive of God himself and his involvement in my life, my crises, my trials, my whatever's going to come my way. And that's what I mean by I would prefer God be planning those things out, because he doesn't just know me, he knows how to use it to be benefit to me and everybody else in the situation. And Satan will never plan it that way. Satan will plan it for my destruction, your destruction, everybody's destruction as he can all at once. So we don't want really him being in charge of these trials. But what other thoughts you got on that, Shady?
I think just being able to continually decipher the difference.
Yeah. To me, that's what's valuable about the question, no matter how many times you bring it up, because I couldn't have answered, meaning to my own self, for my own personal faith, I couldn't have answered it the way I just did 25 years ago. I might have been able to quote some stuff about some stories and say I was supposed to think like that, but it was going over it and over it and over it that has made me really know that to be true. So nothing ever wrong with bringing up the question again.
I think it just leads me to the feelings of in those situations it can tempt me, or I guess anyone, to feel like, well, I failed, so obviously he doesn't love me, or he wasn't taking care of me.
Good. Which that's good to identify, because that's where the deeper core of the question really is. And that is that, like Peter, because I failed, which I have many times, because I failed, did that mean that he cast me off? I've struggled with it from the angle of maybe what I've done is as bad as Judas. Maybe I am Judas, right? So it is in coming back to that story, though, where I can see the evidence that Jesus wanted to rescue Judas as much as he wanted to rescue Peter, and that he didn't cast either of them off. That tells me, nope, it's still safe to run back to him and put our trust in him, because he's working towards our good, not towards our evil. But yeah, you got to go over it again and again. That's nothing wrong with that. That's good. I guess the other aspect of that is just the visual of gold being tried in the fire, would be the biblical phrase, or any precious metal that you need to get the impurities out of. And by the nature of the word picture, the fire, which is what metal workers use to modify, shape, or purify different metals, it's just a visual talking about how God is going to take as careful care at purifying me as a good metal worker, even if they're working with super fine gold, would take, right? It's not a haphazard activity. It's not a, well, let's just throw it in there and see what happens, like Aaron thought he did, when he throws the stuff in. Hey, the calf came out. It's not like that. It's very careful and very with a very purposeful end, and that is to bring about our rescue, our transformation. And so it does come back to that question always, as what his real heart motive towards me is. So it's a great question to bring up. But I was just curious, so what was the main point of today's parable? To change subjects a little bit. You guys nail that down?
We were kind of all over the place. Touched on a lot of different subjects. We talked about the way that the separating of the fish in this case, and we talked about how that happens, how God accomplishes that. in the
that's-
judgment.
That's why I like the remedy version on that one.
Yeah. Do you have that Bible?
No, I do
Right.
not.
Yeah.
You can get it online.
I may have to. I wanted to. My app U version doesn't have it. That's kind of
No, I think it's its
Extra.
own separate app. On my phone, it's an app that's just the Remedy Bible.
yeah. I may have to do that. But I liked it because it's like John was saying, is how yeah. Sometimes it looks like the angels are separating, but in that one, it's the character, the people are being separated.
Yeah, through
So-
the truth about God being poured out or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
It was really well worded.
The healthy versus the diseased.
Yeah.
Fish, yeah, fish. So did you guys make the connection that the angels were the same as the three angels?
Yep, I did.
Okay, good.
Is that the
And-
part where it said that the angels are doing the sorting or something?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is symbolic language for the same same thing as in John 12, 46 through 48. It's the message which I have delivered that will judge you or be your judge or determine the difference between the healthy and the unhealthy fish. It's a message is the main point. That's why I was asking if you connected the three angels.
Yep.
So
I did.
did anybody nail
I'm
down
not
what-
sure I did it well, but I did connect it.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm just curious. Did anybody figure out what the main point of the parable was?
Well, the main point is always to show us the kingdom of God, because that's what he's starting out with, right? He's trying to define the kingdom of heaven.
Was casting the net, the
Yeah.
preaching of the gospel
To who?
to
Everyone.
all.
Yeah, there. That I would say is the main point. Is watch God go again after everyone, right? He's
Yeah, because
trying
the
to
net,
draw
it
all.
says it gathers. Yeah, it says it gathers both good and evil into the church. So it
Yeah.
does.
That's something.
Right. It's indiscriminate.
Yeah, it's indiscriminate. That's a good word. Indiscriminate. This unconditional love goes out after everybody, inviting them all in, not so much to a structure of a organization as to just be connected to a knowledge of God idea of church.
So in the brief few paragraphs that Sister White spends on this, she does talk about that the casting of the net is the preaching of the gospel.
Yep.
So makes that fairly simple statement, fairly clear. Gathers both the evil and the good. But then she says, when the mission of the gospel is completed, so that's an unknown time.
Yeah, unknown time.
The judgment will accomplish the work of separation. So
Yes.
there's like this period where the gospel is being spread, and then there's a period of judgment after that, which creates the separation.
Well, and actually it's the gospel that creates the judgment activity. In other words, you can't really separate those two, but go on with what your point was.
So the question is, aren't we in both activities now? And
Yes.
haven't we always been?
Well, so I would say those who are hearing the truth about God in contrast to their long-standing false ideas, yes, are in that. Whether everybody is yet in that or not, I don't know. But the point that she's making with that sentence about when it is accomplished, meaning when it's finished, it won't be finished until it has been delivered effectively to all living on the earth, right? So you all on this, this study group, I would say absolutely, you're already in that. And then like Peter, James, and John were, from the moment Jesus said, come follow me. And they did. They were in it because he was going to be teaching and saying things that were in contradiction to what they had learned growing up. And they were constantly going to be going through this activity of having to decide and then choose between the truth he was giving versus what they had always thought. And then at one point, they're completely convinced of it. They accept it. They're filled with it. And then they turn around and they become net casters, or I guess maybe we could say at least helping to pull on the net, which is basically to invite others into the knowledge of the truth about God. So yeah, they first were fish, so to speak, and then became assistant fishermen, maybe we could say. But the parable isn't trying to say all that. I'm just using that to describe what that activity really looks like. And so that's why it's valuable to understand that this isn't about physical angels physically picking up people and putting them in or out of a particular area or box. This is about the angels that's representative of the message being taught about God. It entirely does the dividing between the believers and the non-believers. Some who looked like believers for a long time, but they rejected at the end. It's truth that they're rejecting. So when we go to the justice and mercy chart, for instance, and we ask Shady, who's the judge, Shady?
We are.
In what way? I mean, what's the verses that we put there to determine who the judge is?
Oh.
You can just paraphrase. You don't have to.
There's one in John, right?
Well, I wasn't asking you to come up with the exact verses. Just what do you remember it saying? What did we write in that little box? You remember?
Oh. Yes and no. I'm looking.
That's all right. We'll let you find it on your notes.
I'm looking for my cheat sheets that Barb gave me, and now I can't find them.
Barb, you remember what do we put in that box?
He doesn't come to condemn the world; he comes to save it. Right?
Okay, good. That's one of them. Yep.
The truth about God, the message of the truth about God.
Truth about God, Shady. Does that jog your memory?
Yes.
Truth about God is the judge. Well, what we're saying in that, which, yes, you're right. The verse you quoted was definitely one of them. That he didn't come to judge and condemn us, John 3. John 5, he said, my Father doesn't judge. John 12, he says, I don't judge either. The truth that I have delivered you, it does the judgment or the judging or the work of judging. So really what we're teaching in that idea is the system that the way that God does judgment, the way that he does the separating of the fish is another way to say that, is that he delivers the truth and then he allows all the fish to respond to that truth. And they will respond with either full acceptance at one point or full rejection. And that is how the fish are separated. This morning, the one John sent me to watch from Tim Jennings, he was using some verses out of Matthew to talk about the fact that by your words, you will be judged. And there was a whole string of verses there. He was using that to say, why does it say the words? And he said, because the word or what comes out of your mouth are the issues of the heart, or what's in your heart is what comes out of the mouth. So the words are only representative of what's in your heart or in your character. And in the end, what makes the difference between the saved and the lost is really those who submitted to God and characters were changed, and those who rejected God, whose characters remained in the fish scenario, might be rotten fish or something wrong with the fish, right? So anyway, that's the point. Is it's just explaining again how God's judgment works. It's not the church leaders who get to decide who's good fish and who's bad fish. It's not you or I. It is you get to determine, are you going to surrender? And therefore the evidence of the Spirit working in you because you accepted and believed the message, or evidence of rejection of the message. That's what's going to determine the difference between the good fish and the bad fish.
I like that gold refining you brought up earlier too, because if you think about it, it takes a long time to get the
Dross.
yeah off the gold.
Yeah.
But the thing is, by using the God as the person that's doing it, the gold has to be trusting.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't, he'll fight and he'll fall into the fire, or what I'm saying there,
Right.
or he won't be refined. So in other words, he has to let the master refine the gold.
Yeah, do the work.
Yep.
Which is why Shady's question at the beginning was so important. Otherwise, you're left on your own as the fish to make yourself good enough to get chosen by the angels. See, that would be the not right program.
So is it acceptable to say we do have a part though? Like we do have to have a part in making that choice?
Absolutely. In this case, like on Justice and Mercy chart, you're choosing to submit to the refiner because you've learned to trust him to do the work, which that's our connection to trials, so that he can bring about a transformation of our character. That is a part. That's a huge part for a human, for us to trust him and submit and surrender to him. That's against our nature. Our nature is to trust self, take care of it ourselves, fix it ourselves, do it ourselves, versus, fully trust and surrender to him. So your statement was correct, Shady, about we judge ourselves. I was only wanting to re-explain again how we get to that, right? It's not just that you're left on your own to judge. He's going to do the work to reveal the truth. He's going to bring about your opportunity to know the difference between the right version of God versus the wrong version of God and all that stuff. He's going to do all that. And then it's up to us to choose or decide, do we want to trust him and submit to him or not? Yeah, that's always part of the formula.
Okay.
Hey, I noticed you mentioned something about three angels' message in this at the beginning.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the gospel
Yes.
part?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
why don't we think of the three angels' message as the gospel usually? Because that's not my first thought. That's not how I've always heard it described. It's more
No, okay, well, that's why we don't, because we were taught it was something else. We were taught it
Well,
was
I've
bad
never-
news about the Catholics or.
Okay, just right. I'm being serious here. When was
I
the
know.
last time you heard somebody from up front at a church say, we need to preach the three angels' message, and the next word out of their mouth was gospel? I don't think I remember ever hearing that.
No.
Ever. Not once. Now, maybe I'm blind, but I don't remember it. I can't recall it. So that wasn't my first thought, sadly, because it's just hardwired what I've heard over and over, which is something else.
So first off, with the three angels, with my comment, was to make a connection that in the Bible, angels are used to represent the idea of a message. So when we read the parable, it's wrong to assume that by the parable, he means literally angels will come down and literally start stacking people into two groups. And I don't mean that there aren't literal angels. Obviously there are, and they are literally here. And they're even literally working constantly in our behalf, trying to help us come to know the truth. But that's not the point of the parable. The point in the parable is that angels represent a teaching, a message, an idea, which is the gospel. And so that's why she says in the very beginning, the net is the teaching of the gospel. It's the work of the gospel to reach out to all, to invite all to come to know Christ. That is the main point of the parable. And so, but it's also true, and that's why I said it the way I said it, that the net is the three angels' message. And we should have learned that the three angels' message is the gospel. And your point, Charlie, is correct. That is not what we have typically been taught to believe about that. And I will admit that when you just read Revelation 14, the verses there about angel 1, 2, and 3, it in the list naturally is a bunch of negative, meaning angel number 2. Well, in first act, let's do angel number 1. Angel number 1, we did not naturally hear any good news in the idea of the hour of his judgment is at hand or now. That sounded like, whew, bad news, scary, we're in trouble. Then we went to angel 2 and we heard, yeah, see, she's messed up. Fallen is Babylon. She's the problem. She's the whole problem. She's what caused me to have a problem. So now at least we got somebody to blame. That's what we naturally do with the verse. And then the next one, so make sure you don't have the mark because the beast is going to cause the whole world to wander after it and all this kind of stuff. So come out of her, my people, and touch not the unclean thing. And so we thought the message was about warning everybody to make sure they stay far away from the Catholics. Well, so if that's our natural reading of the verses, why would we connect that really to gospel? Because gospel is supposed to be about good news, not bad news.
Yeah, what I get out of the three angels message now is that the first message is carrying the good news or the character of God. Well, now we get to see God's true character. So therefore, the second angel's message just makes sense that confusion about God is now fallen. It's useless. I mean, people can still try it. And the third angel's message is that people do still try.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so you learned a different view versus our first natural reading of those verses, right? We learned to start interpreting based on God's language what we're really reading about. And so the fact that the first angel carries the gospel means it was more natural for us to get focused on all the negative. We kind of skipped over that it was even carrying the gospel. Like, what's the point of that? And I'm not saying you or I necessarily, Charlie. I'm just talking about in general, this is how we read it. But then Ellen White, comes along, for instance, and challenges us with ideas like the third angel's message is justification by faith, righteousness by faith in verity. And boy, that threw us all for a loop back in the day, right? So we had to regurgitate on that. And then we had to go back and actually learn what the gospel was before the verses can really make any sense correctly to us at all. But now it should come as our first thought, which was your point, Charlie. It should be how we see the three angels message right from the get-go. That this is about the good news about God revealing himself so that others can see and taste and know. And the sad thing is that we have rejected him in the past, and some will keep rejecting him. That's angel number 2. And angel number 3, some will reject him so hard that they'll end up, completely on the opposite side, like the Jews. And in Revelation, it calls it Antichrist, or in the New Testament, it calls it Antichrist. Other thoughts on that, Charlie?
I feel like I'm having to unlearn more than
Then you bargain
there
for
is to learn. It seems like it's a simple concept that has been buried so deep that it takes more unburying than actually seeing it.
Yes.
Which is
true.
a sad condition to be in.
I was excited this morning. Again, John sent me a link to Tim Jennings' thing this morning. And so I listened to it this morning. And I was excited that he got as bold as he did to say that to be teaching and believing in the penal substitutionary theory was to continue to be enslaved. I'm putting some of my words in here, enslaved to Romanism, or I would add Antichrist. He basically said that to continue believing and teaching and propagating and pushing the false Roman added to Christianity concept of penal substitutionary theory on judgment, on the cross, on the final judgment in the end, all this stuff was basically, my words, to receive the mark of the beast. So he got pretty bold with that this morning. I thought that was cool.
Well, yeah. I don't like catchphrases very well, but it's a lot easier to say what it isn't than to put in a theory what it is. So I guess I'm okay with saying what he said there, if that's what he said. However, then somebody says, well, then what's your theory? You know, it can, the good news is that there isn't a name for it. And, you know, people will say, well, this is my favorite. We don't need to go by some Wikipedia article for what the real thing is. We have one document, and that is what Jesus shared with us, and we should go by that, which I guess.
Well, and I was repeating it for the benefit of our ears.
I know.
I wouldn't use
It's
that in
just-
front of a mixed group. They wouldn't even know what I'm talking about, right? But
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
For us to be that clear that that is the foundation for what is Antichrist and what is to be the basis of beast power, beast theology, and to receive the mark of the beast, that's valuable, important understanding.
Yeah.
But yeah, I probably won't get up in front of a group, even an Adventist group, and say, well, the problem is penal substitute. You know, they're gonna be like, all confused.
Well, the
Yeah,
people
well-
the people that are listening to him know exactly what he's talking about.
Maybe.
Oh, I think
But
a lot of them do.
Yeah, but I'll welcome any chance to talk about it again, but we're going to work on it from the standpoint of let us lay out the truth as it builds, as Jesus shows us and explains it in his life, which you've heard me do many, many times. So we're not going to change the strategy of how to attack that, but we do need to be that clear about it, that this is the work of Antichrist that has got the most powerful hold on the people today.
So John, you know that the dream that was it, I don't remember who had it, about the gems that were that got dirty and then they were cleaned off again. Is that, it was one of the early pioneers. I think I know who it is.
James White had that dream.
Is James White?
Yeah.
Okay. So in that story, the light that is given or that is found by people, it's described as some light is found by those who are being breathed on by Satan. They actually do discover more light, but then great light is given to, much more light is given to those who follow Jesus and where he goes. So that light isn't like what we're talking about here. If you mention the three angels message, even though it might not be what I heard growing up, it is not something new, but what it originally was, but brought out polished. These gems had become dirty, and the true picture of what it really was. And didn't in the vision they seem even brighter and more glorious than before?
Yeah, and she makes
Yeah,
a
and they're
point
put
in that.
their proper setting.
Yeah, proper setting. Yeah, proper
Okay,
setting.
yeah. So here, that's what I see. What I'm longing for is we don't have to be trying to dig out something that was never there in the first place. That what we're longing for is the original picture, but because of the dirt and the trouble that came along from it, it will shine in a way that is even brighter than before, because of the trials that we've had to go through, that we brought onto ourselves because we turned away to our own, to fables of our own devising, and to find the truth hidden under this whole thing is just, it's, I hear these things and I go, what else could there be that's more pivotal to understanding,
That's brighter.
that's brighter than that God is love, and not just some of the time, and not there will come a time when he's not, but God is love. And as Shady's kind of describing her personal struggle, I kind of struggle with this. This is
Oh,
probably the most valuable thing we can learn.
Charlie, I need to stop you there. You said there will come a time when he's not love.
No.
I was saying that people say that.
Oh, that people say that. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Meaning
So-
he's loving, but then at the end he's gonna
Until he
lose
has
his
to
temper.
zap. Yeah,
Yeah,
until
then,
he has
then
to
we're gonna
zap.
do a strange work.
Yeah.
I'm saying that,
Okay.
and this is one of the most useful things that we could be sharing at an unashamed volume, that God
Yes,
is
I
love,
like that.
100% of the time.
Unashamed volume. I like that.
There's no, that's pretty much what Jesus did, his whole ministry.
Yeah,
Even
Charlie,
the
I
love to
think
the Pharisees.
I was going to say, I think that what we watch is as God puts together in front of us, because I don't even see it as human hands putting those gems into right settings, right? That's a work the Holy Spirit does before our eyes. That's the only way we're going to that we do see it. The sad thing is then to watch the teachers of the law run back in the room and go, hold on, that doesn't go there. And they want to put it back down on the ground and put some dirt around it like it belonged where it was before. And then we call that standing by our pillars.
I kind of got stuck in another thought. I missed the last little part there.
Well, just that when they run back in, when God is putting the gems in the right settings,
Mm-hmm.
and it's brighter and brighter and brighter, there are the teachers of the law who tend to love to run back in and go, no, that gem doesn't go there. It belongs over here on the floor with some dirt around it again. And they want to keep it where it was when it was scattered all over the room. Your point
Exactly.
was that the gems were gems no matter where they were, right? The gems didn't need changing. The gems needed putting in the right settings. Then it got brighter and brighter and brighter. And we keep thinking it needs to go back in the old setting. And I watch as the teachers of the law want to just keep putting it back in that other setting and then claim that that's what it means to stand by our old pillars, which is to get the gems back in the dirt instead of watching where God's putting them.
That's exactly what. Yes. So when I was listening to something last night, book, and it was bringing up some of the battle that was happening around 1888-ish and thereafter slightly. So I think the point was that it's called the sifting, or the
Sifting or shaking?
Shaking. I was like, what is that word? The shaking that was spoken about by Ellen White. And if I understood it correctly, the way that it was written out, it was actually in reference, if you take the context of when it was said and who it was said to, the shaking was those people who are fighting against, specifically, that we have no work to do to bring about our righteousness. The righteousness comes from Jesus. He is the one. Like, what work is there that could be done by us that isn't filthy rags until it comes out of love, until he puts that, like, Jesus spent his time doing works one after the other, but not one of them did he do on his own without direction from the Father. He got all of his works, he showed us that righteousness comes from the Father. So the shaking was interesting. You know, we talk about the shaking, and that's another one of those things that I don't think I've ever heard that spoken of. It's kind of like in that case, they were worried that the law was being done away with.
Right.
Like they wanted to put the dirt back on the gems.
Right.
They're not willing to take it off. It was exactly the same thing as what had happened when Jesus came. They were sure he was doing away with the law, but he was speaking of the righteousness of the Father the whole time.
Yeah, and from their reference point, the shaking, if they'd have said, yeah, and this is the shaking, they would have been referring to the idea that many were being shaken out of the church, as in follow Jesus.
I wonder whether the shaking, you know, is not the people that are, it's the ones who say, you're causing all this trouble. They're the ones that are shaking.
Well, they're the ones being shaken out.
Yeah, but
Sister White says what causes the shaking is the teaching or the preaching of the straight testimony, which is,
yes, word for word, yes.
Which is the reference to the gems in right settings. To put those two together. Because the gems in the wrong setting, well, they're still gems, but it's not quite straight. It's a little bit crooked. So anyway, let me just add in here real quick. So Shady, I know we're floating around with all this other Adventist lingo, but we're really talking about what you brought up in the first place, which is in the hands of God, like Peter, part of what we need to go through is the having of the truth being tested. So in other words, it is what God said. Is it right? Does it come out that is truthful? And so the testing of our faith is not referring to just, do we pass the quiz like a theology quiz? It's testing of what we believe in. Is it true? Is it not true? Because when it's true and we find it to be true, then it's hard to shake us or break us off of that truth. And that's the real trials, trying in the fire, sifting. They're all different ways to say the same thing. And to see it in real practical terms, not just symbolic terms, is to watch again the story. Jesus gets these fishermen, says, come follow me, and he starts to teach them things. And yeah, they're a little slow to learn, and yeah, they don't get it real fast, but they do get it. And what he teaches them, sets in front of them, has such a huge effect, changes them completely, and brings about what the effect we see in the book of Acts with Pentecost and so on. So that is its purpose, that's its motive. And then in that story, we can watch the refiner, that's Jesus, go to work, and his motive and his heart and his purpose and his character, being willing to even die to help the disciples understand it. That's the real process of trial and refiner and all of that. It's not some God off in the distance going, well, let's see if you can pass this quiz. That would be the devil's version of all these ideas.
So change the subject just a little.
Go ahead, Frank.
Are we going to be going over Matthew 13, 51 and 52 next week?
Yeah, what parable is that?
Things new and old. Well, that's what the chapter is in
Yeah.
Great Controversy.
I mean, Christ's object lessons?
Yeah, Christ's object lessons. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, whatever the next chapter in Christ's object lessons will be, the parable we'll go over.
Good, because I'm going to have some questions for you on that one.
I think he's warning you, Bobby, to get
at least
ready.
you give me a heads up to get ready.
Yeah.
Frank,
There's
are
some
you
good,
reading ahead
there's some
again?
good stuff in it.
Yeah, it does.
What was that?
I said, are you reading ahead again?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
No, that's good. Well, Barb or Shady, anything else you want to work on today? I missed Thursday night and I missed this morning, so.
I'm okay for now that we've rehashed this testing thing several times.
All right. Well,
For now. Tomorrow morning I'll wake up and need another example.
she's ready for a test now.
I think she's going through one.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question.
Hey, Wendell, go for it.
Hey, back to the parable, and I'm glad you put your 2 cents in, because this is the way you explained it was the pathway I was going about the separation, that the gospel message does the separation. But then we get in different translations get into this idea of good and bad, or healthy and diseased, or that sort of thing. And in the synoptic gospels, each gospel mentions there's no one good. And then Romans talks about there's no one righteous. So how do you see that here when a particular translation uses like good fish?
Good or bad, or well,
Yeah.
I think to find the hope in it, if I used one quote you said about no one is good, there's more to that statement. No one is good except God.
Right.
So in the sanctuary message, for instance, we learn that the furniture, there was nothing inherently holy about the furniture until there was 2 symbols used for the until. One was the sprinkling of blood, or the life of Jesus. The other was the presence of God physically, right? When the physical presence of God came into the temple, then there was, fire and smoke and all this. And then his presence made it holy. So the fish all by itself will not explain all this, but we're going to pull in from everywhere else to say that. So really the difference between the healthy fish and the unhealthy fish are those who let God dwell in them, and therefore they were made good. Like Jesus says, who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean thing? Not one. And he's talking to the Pharisees about their danger of trying to attain righteousness on their own. But he's also trying to divert their attention to the fact that God is able to bring a clean thing out of an unclean, or change the leopard's spots or the Ethiopian's color. So we add the verse then, this is impossible except with God, or with God all things are possible, right? So I think that's when we weave that into the story, we've again laid the gospel in its complete form, which to me is 2 main components. 1, the love of God towards man, and 2, God's desire and power to rescue and save man. Not just move him from earth to heaven, but actually, form his character, transform his character. So I think obviously that has to be part of the fish story, even though the fish parable isn't taking the time to work on the how does one fish, be a bad fish and another one a good fish, because they're gonna all start out as, like you said, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But Jesus is just using the fish to say, hey, every fisherman knows when you get a net full of fish, the next thing you're going to do is look for, there's one that's not so good. We're not going to eat that one. And you throw it back. And so he's just using that to define that, you know, this isn't about the net catching everybody and then everybody's forced into the kingdom, or everybody, both good and bad, are saved in eternity. But the parable itself, you're right, does not define how does one become a good or a bad fish. That we have to take from other places and insert it into the meaning. Is that what you were thinking, Wendell?
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I'm always asking, you know, what's the main point when we learn to teach in parables, or even read and understand parables. It's good to figure out what's the main point, and then there's usually going to be one or two sub points, but not every point is usually forced into one parable. You know, we like to play with them and stretch them and see how far we can go with it, but the teller of the parable is really intending to give one main point and maybe one sub point, is what I call them. So in this case, the main point is that God goes after a lot of fish, you know, all of them. He'd like to wrap that net around. So he's going to deliver the gospel, the net, to all. But then there's going to be a determination as to whether in the end of the story, the fish is good or bad, good for food, bad for food, rotten, not rotten. And that is as far as, you know, the point of this one parable.
So the real question is, do we want to be judged?
When I was a teenager, I said no. No, I'm running from that.
I'm not ready. I'm not ready.
Yeah, I didn't get good enough yet.
Did you guys go over the Romans 3:4 to see who's judging who?
Yeah, that is one of the judgments for sure.
Well, we were talking about how judgment works, and why it would mean, why the angels would be a symbol of a teaching or a message, as in the gospel. We use John, the ones I normally use, John 12, John 3, John 5. But Romans, you want to read those, Wendell, so we can hear how those fit?
Yeah, sure. Does anybody have the Phillips translation?
I do, but I can't read it to you today.
Phillips, let me see.
Well, I'll read the Amplified. So it says, by no means let God be found true, though every human being is false and a liar, as it is written, that you, uppercase Y, may be justified and shown to be upright in what you say, and prevail when you are judged by sinful man, in quotation or brackets.
Pretty good.
Anyone have the Phillips translation?
Should be able to Google it, eh, John?
Yeah, I could probably. There's a cross-reference on that verse to Psalms 51:4, if you wanted to read that too. I'll look up
51, Psalms 51.
Yeah, 51 verse 4.
Verse 4.
Okay.
Okay.
Against thee only have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest.
Yeah. Let's see. Phillips. Guess if I just
I think Graham Maxwell prefers the Phillips translation.
Yeah,
for
the Phillips is really good.
Romans 3:4.
Do you know what the letters are for it? Is it like PHP or?
Yeah, I think it's PHP.
Huh. Yeah, Bible Gateway doesn't have it.
Just Google Romans 3, what was it?
Phillips.
And then put Phillips translation in the search.
Okay. Is there any advantage then in being one of the chosen people? Does circumcision mean anything? Yeah, this one doesn't do verse designations. So,
Right. That's right. Just keep reading.
yes, of course, a great deal in every way. You have only to think of one thing to begin with. It was the Jews to whom God's messages were entrusted. Some of them were undoubtedly faithless. But what then? Can you imagine that their faithlessness could disturb the faithfulness of God? Of course not. Let us think of God as true. Even if every living man be proved a liar, remember the scripture, that you may be justified in your words and may overcome when you are judged. I'm pretty
Which
sure
means that's a reference from the Old Testament.
I believe it is from Psalms 51:4, but it sounded different when he read it from wherever he read it from. I think it was King James.
King James, yeah.
Well, what I remember Graham Maxwell saying the Phillips translation said was the last part of Romans 3:4 is that it says that you may win your day in court when you are judged, that you may win your case in court.
Is that a little further on, John?
Maybe verse 5-8. But if your wickedness advertises the goodness of God, do we feel that God is being unfair to punish us in return? I'm using a human tit for tat argument. Not a bit of it. What sort of a person would God be then to judge the world? It is like saying that if my line throws into sharp relief the truth of God and, so to speak, enhances his reputation, then why should he repay me by judging me a sinner? Similarly, why not do evil that good may be? By contrast, all the more conspicuous and valuable? Question. As a matter of fact, I am reported as urging this very thing by some slanderously and others quite seriously. But of course, such an argument is quite properly condemned. So he seems to be dealing with the fact that he's being accused of saying that we should sin to highlight the goodness of God.
Yeah, exactly. But you didn't see back in that earlier part something about winning a day in court.
No.
remember Graham
And this
saying
is
that,
the
right?
Phillips, J.B. Phillips New Testament.
Yeah.
And it says, it's just a quote from, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Psalms 51:4. That you may be justified in your words and may overcome or win or whatever when you are judged.
Well, it still makes the same point.
Yeah.
I was explaining to my mom and dad this morning that in this video you sent me the link to, John, Jennings lays out 4 different judgments or 4 different components of judgment, which I thought was very well put. And all 4 of those are actually on the justice and mercy explanation of judgment.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool because they all fit together. So on the justice and mercy study, we teach or it shows how the whole system of judgment works. And then what I saw him do was divide that into 4 like parts of the activity, which
Mhm.
they don't conflict at all. It just broke down 4 different pieces of the whole picture of the whole thing, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, I thought it was pretty good.
Did you notice his description of wrath?
Yeah, perfect.
I
Right
was
on.
like, oh my goodness. All he did different was he chose a tall building instead of a cliff.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that was great. Well, very good, everyone. Nice to get on and see you all. Sound like everybody needs to take a rest. Everybody's worn out and
Brain
tired.
overload.
Brain overload. I don't know.
Shady's over there testing for her test.
Yeah.
Studying for her test.
I don't know what is going on. I don't even know how this became such a issue for me.
Well, it's good. You want it to be solid in your mind. You want it to, to make sense and be a part of how you think. And
Here's what I
sometimes
think
we
it's
have to keep going through things.
here's what I
until they
think it's
get
for,
there.
Shady. Well, here's what it's for, is that people out there truly believe the version that bothers you. And for you to be able to be emotionally connected to the wrong version versus the right version makes you more capable of helping them. So I think it's a very useful activity for you to emotionally struggle through a bit.
Yeah, I think another part of it is that I think he's been healing me quite a bit,
Mhm.
and I've just been all in,
Yeah.
and now it feels like I've had a little bit of time to start second guessing it, or like I just dove in and didn't look back, and then the more I study, the more questions come up, because for a while I really didn't have a lot of questions. I was just like, I'm just taking it in, I'm believing all of
Right.
it.
Right.
And the more I
This is a different
study,
phase.
yeah, and now I'm getting worried that I'm like gonna spiral or something, like now I've had time to think about it and question it, and so I'm a little worried that that's where it's going.
And that's why I wanted to say to you what I was saying, because you're struggling with it. Every time I've heard you bring it up, is I haven't heard you questioning God's goodness. I've heard you questioning the wrong idea about this testing thing. So I haven't heard you suddenly like spiraling away from truth, but rather saying, wait a minute, if this is true about God, then why do we say this over here? Or what does this mean when it says this? Because that can't go contrary to what we've learned about God's goodness. So that's my point, is that I think it's less about you, struggling and falling away from something so much as it is for you to be emotionally connected to what either you used to think or what many still think, doesn't matter which, versus what you're coming to know to be true. That's useful. That's helpful. You hear me do it all the time when I talk about, well, when I was, a kid, I believed this, or I thought this way, or I'm emotionally connecting in to what it was like to be sitting there thinking what I was thinking back then. And that's just so that I can connect with people in the room who also have been thinking that. And so I'm not criticizing them or, judging them, but I'm understanding. And then I'm going to share next what I have found to be the truth in regards to that idea or that question. So it's a useful activity. I wouldn't encourage you to panic about it at all.
Not yet, but I could feel myself getting very guarded, but I didn't know where the guard was coming from. I didn't know if the guard was coming from I'm starting not to believe, or the guard was coming from, I'm having these thoughts and I feel like they're not from a righteous place. And now I want to reaffirm that that's not the case.
Sure.
So I'd,
And I know you'll tend to, left to your own, operation, you'll tend to add extra panic. That's what I'm telling you. Yeah, don't panic.
not yet.
It's still just going back to, wait a minute, did he say he loved me or not?
Yeah.
Did he prove he loved me or not? That's still the most important core element. And since salvation is not about passing a theology quiz, it's not really a requirement that you can at this moment explain all difficult questions. Just grab onto and hang on to the fact that he's proven that he loves us. Then it's safe to keep asking the rest of the questions. All right, Charlie, anything else you got cooking over there?
I was reviewing that shaking reference, so it's something that I probably won't be able to bring up again without a lot of reading. But yeah, it's pretty cool to. It just puts a whole new spin on that shaking, as in it's not. We have a pattern to look at that's already happened, so that we can understand the future of what it's describing, which I don't think I'd ever seen before.
Yeah,
There's
to me,
only
that's
kind of left to guessing.
To me, that's
a little
what's
bit.
delightful, is we can look backwards to go, yeah, what did it look like when the shaking happened before?
Yeah, well, it's quite clear what was going on here, but I'm not able to encapsulate it in a sentence yet. So,
Well, it's
for
even
another-
interesting to me to connect together that there was a physical shaking to be a manifestation of the spiritual shaking that was occurring, meaning at the cross there was a physical earthquake.
Yeah.
And that was to symbolize or to express in the physical realm what had been going on in the spiritual realm the whole time Jesus was teaching. And of course, they didn't have a fanciful connection to that word like we do. That wasn't a term that I remember them tossing around very much, but it certainly works for us.
I really appreciate the digging on this topic as well, Shady, because like I'm still working on James and will be for another bit here, and so I really enjoyed our conversation, as a group a couple days ago. I have some more to add to that to keep digging deeper, keep pushing on that same topic. So I'm not done with it yet. I'd really like to bring up more about this.
Yes, thank you all.
Really.
Thank you all for your discussions.
You still working on that project, Charlie, about doing something with James?
Yeah, this is it's gonna be going on for a while, so it's not gonna be a 1 week thing. It's
that's right. It was a Bible study you were going to go to where they're working on James, right?
Yeah, I went to it and once here and didn't really get down to anything of substance until the very end. And yeah, I hate to bring this, would be a whole nother can of worms to start it right now. So maybe I should save this for the next conversation.
That's fine.
But I would like to bring it because it's I don't necessarily have I'm working on the next step. I asked the questions but didn't try to answer them at all. So there's a lot of people hanging.
We haven't caught up for a while, so you can call me during the week if you want.
I would actually really like to do that.
And then we can also bounce it around this next Thursday night if you guys want.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, well, have a good rest of the Sabbath, you guys. Love you guys. Good to see everybody.
Love
I'll
you too.
work towards being on Thursday.
Well, hopefully you have some improvement, Bobby.
Oh yeah, well, as you can see, I'm still able to sit here and talk even if I can't see. You just might have to, keep reading me what it is we're working on because I can't read it. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's all temporary anyway, so I'm not panicked about any of it.
That's true.
All righty, we'll see you guys a little bit later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye.